Commander Thekvar had been running maximum security facilities for 3 decades, and he'd seen every type of prisoner the galaxy had to offer. Murderous Krillian assassins, child's play, psychotic Velthari war criminals, Tuesday afternoon entertainment. But this tiny human female sitting in cell block 7 had him completely baffled. Maya Chen. That was her name, according to the arrest files. 5 feet, 4 inches of what the intelligence reports dramatically called a Deathworlder specimen. Thekvar had to suppress a laugh every time he read that designation. Deathworlder. The humans barely had space travel, for crying out loud. Their homeworld was a backwater rock in some forgotten spiral arm, and yet the Galactic Council insisted on treating them like they were walking weapons of mass destruction. 47 days. That's how long the human had been sitting in her cell without saying a single word. Not one syllable. Not even a grunt of acknowledgement when the guards brought her the standard nutrient paste. She just sat there, cross-legged on the metal floor, staring at the wall with those unsettling brown eyes of hers. The guards had started a betting pool on day 15. Officer Mole Dan was convinced she'd crack by day 30 and start babbling about her terrorist network, like all the others eventually did. Sergeant Creeks, ever the optimist, had put his credits on day 25, claiming that humans were too primitive to handle advanced interrogation techniques for long. Here they were on day 47, and both guards were considerably poorer for their assumptions. Maybe she's defective, Mole Dan had suggested during the morning briefing, his purple tentacles twitching with frustration. I mean, look at her. She's barely evolved beyond throwing rocks at things. How much mental capacity could she possibly have? Thekvar adjusted his ceremonial chest plates and gazed through the reinforced transparent aluminum at their silent prisoner. The human looked almost meditative, which was ridiculous because everyone knew Deathworlders were supposed to be violent and predictable creatures who solved problems by hitting them with bigger problems. This one just sat there, breathing, resisting, being annoyingly, frustratingly, completely silent. Sir? Crix's voice interrupted his thoughts. Should we increase the psychological pressure today? Maybe adjust the cell temperature or modify the lighting frequency? Thekvar turned away from the viewing panel with a dismissive wave of his 4 arms. Continue standard protocols, Sergeant. Every prisoner breaks eventually, even the supposedly dangerous ones from the so-called Deathworlds. He couldn't have been more wrong. By the end of the day, 2 of his guards would be dead, his facility would be in ruins, and he'd learn exactly why the Galactic Council had been so very afraid of letting humans loose in the galaxy. But that was still 8 hours away. The Vorthak Maximum Security Detention Center was, without question, the most advanced prison facility in 3 sectors. Thekvar took considerable pride in giving new staff the grand tour, pointing out each layer of supposedly impenetrable security with the enthusiasm of a parent showing off baby pictures. Energy barriers that could slice through battleship hull plating? Check. Quantum locked doors that required DNA authorization from 3 separate species? Double check. Atmospheric processors that could flood any cell with knockout gas in under 4 seconds? Triple check, with a side of smug satisfaction. Sergeant Crix, a bulky Korvaxian with skin like gray concrete and about as much personality, had been Thekvar's right hand for 8 years. He handled the more physical aspects of prisoner management with the subtlety of a meteor impact. His partner, Officer Mole Dan, was a tentacled Zephyrian whose purple appendages could apparently detect emotional fluctuations in other species. Together, they made an interrogation team that had broken some of the most hardened criminals in known space. The human's daily schedule is pathetically simple, Crix reported during their morning briefing, consulting his datapad with obvious disdain. 0600 hours, nutrient delivery. She ignores it. 0800 hours, interrogation session. She stares at the wall. 1200 hours, second nutrient delivery, more ignoring. 1600 hours, psychological evaluation. More wall staring. Mole Dan's tentacles curled with amusement. Her primitive neural pathways probably can't process our advanced questioning techniques. I mean, What kind of species develops on a planet where everything is actively trying to kill them and still manages to be this boring? The irony, of course, was that their primitive prisoner had already identified 17 different ways to escape their impenetrable facility, and calculated the exact chemical composition of their atmospheric system, and determined the structural weak points in their quantum-locked doors. She was just waiting for the right moment to mention it. That moment was approximately 6 hours away. Day 47 started like every other day in the past 6 weeks. Crick stomped into the interrogation chamber with all the grace of a construction vehicle, his massive frame casting shadows across the sterile white walls. Mole Dan slithered in behind him, tentacles already twitching in anticipation of what he was certain would be another gloriously futile session. Maya Chen sat in the center of the room, secured to a chair that could theoretically hold a rampaging Gorvan battle beast. She looked exactly as she had for the previous 46 days, calm, silent, and thoroughly unimpressed by their advanced interrogation setup. "Good morning, Deathworlder," Crix growled, settling his bulk into the reinforced chair across from her. "Ready to tell us about your terrorist cell today? Or are we going to play the staring contest game again?" Silence. "Yeah?" Mole Dan activated the emotional resonance scanner, his tentacles dancing over the controls. "Her stress levels are completely normal, Sergeant. It's like she's sitting in a meditation garden instead of a maximum security prison. Honestly, I'm starting to think these humans are just defective." The purple alien leaned forward, studying Maya's face with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly boring specimen. "I mean, look at her. No enhanced cybernetics, no genetic modifications, no neural implants. Just base organic tissue and whatever passes for intelligence in that tiny skull of hers." Crick snorted with amusement. 47 days, and the great Deathworlder hasn't said a single word. The Galactic Council's intelligence reports were obviously complete garbage. This thing couldn't organize a prison break if we gave her the blueprints and I smell gas. The words hit the interrogation chamber like a physical blow. Both guards froze, staring at Maya as if she'd suddenly sprouted wings and started juggling plasma grenades. What did you just say?" Mole Dan stammered, his tentacles going completely still for the first time in recorded history. Maya's brown eyes shifted from the wall to focus directly on the two guards. When she spoke again, her voice was perfectly calm, almost conversational. "I said, I smell gas. Methane, specifically, with trace amounts of hydrogen sulfide and some kind of industrial lubricant. It's been getting stronger for the past 3 days." Crix burst into laughter, slapping his knee with enough force to dent the metal chair. "Oh, this is rich." The silent treatment ends, and the first thing she does is claim she can smell something our advanced sensors can't detect. "What's next? Are you going to tell us you can see through walls with your primitive human eyes?" Mole Dan joined in the laughter, his tentacles writhing with mirth. 47 days of psychological pressure, and this is what breaks her. A hallucination about smelling gas? I'm almost disappointed. I was expecting something more dramatic. But Thekvar, watching through the security feed from his command center, wasn't laughing. Something cold was crawling up his spine as he stared at the human's face. There was no desperation there, no signs of mental breakdown or hallucination. There was only absolute, terrifying certainty. He reached for the facility's atmospheric readings with trembling fingers. The methane levels in Section 7 had been climbing for 72 hours. Thekvar's command center erupted into chaos as alarms began shrieking across every console. The atmospheric monitoring system, which had been running routine scans every 6 hours for the past 3 decades without incident, it was suddenly painting the entire facility in angry red warning indicators. "Sir." Lieutenant Vex Keel's voice cracked with panic as she frantically manipulated the holographic displays. Methane levels in Section 7 are at 18% and climbing. How did we miss this? 18%. Thekvar felt his stomach drop into his boots. The methane became explosive at 5% concentration. At 18%, they were sitting on top of a bomb that could level half the facility. Back in the interrogation chamber, Maya was watching the guard's expressions shift from smug amusement to dawning horror with what could only be described as professional interest. "You're wondering how I knew," she said, her voice still maddeningly calm. "It's actually pretty simple. Human noses can detect methane at concentrations as low as 1 part per million. Your sensors are calibrated for much higher thresholds because, frankly, your species never needed to worry about trace gases trying to kill you." Crix's gray skin had turned an alarming shade of pale. That's impossible. Our technology is centuries ahead of your primitive. Your technology is designed by species that evolved on worlds where the atmosphere stayed put," Maya interrupted, and for the first time since her capture, there was a hint of something sharp in her voice. "Earth? Earth tried to kill us with everything from toxic gases seeping out of the ground to invisible carbon monoxide from our own fires. We learned to smell danger because the ones who couldn't smell it died." She leaned back in her restraint chair, looking almost relaxed. "I've been tracking this leak for 3 weeks. Started small. Probably from a microfracture in one of your power core's containment seals. Your fancy sensors didn't notice because they're programmed to ignore anything below 5% concentration. Why would they bother? None of your species can detect it anyway." Moldan's tentacles were trembling as he fumbled with his communication device. "Command. Command, we need immediate evacuation of Section 7. The human is claiming there's a gas leak." Thekvar's voice crackled through the intercom, tight with barely controlled panic. "Officer Moldan. Atmospheric readings show methane at critical levels." "How long has she known?" Maya tilted her head, considering the question. "Since day 24, I'd say. That's when I first caught the scent. Been getting stronger every day since then. I was actually starting to wonder if you were planning to blow up your own facility as some kind of exotic torture method." The casual way she said it, like she was discussing the weather instead of imminent death, made Crix's hands shake as he reached for his sidearm. You knew we were all in danger for over 3 weeks and you said nothing?" "You didn't ask," Maya replied with a shrug that somehow managed to be visible even through the restraints. "Besides, I was curious to see how long it would take your advanced systems to notice. Turns out the answer is they wouldn't. If I hadn't mentioned it, you'd have all been turned into very small, very scattered pieces sometime in the next few hours." The lights flickered as emergency power systems began routing power away from Section 7. Through the facility's speakers, evacuation alarms were now wailing with the kind of urgency that made seasoned prison guards break into a cold sweat. "The really interesting part," Maya continued, her voice cutting through the chaos with eerie clarity, "is that your power core is designed with a fail-safe that's supposed to detect this exact problem. But it relies on the same atmospheric sensors that missed the leak in the first place." Thekvar's voice over the intercom was barely recognizable. "What are you saying?" Maya smiled for the first time in 47 days, and it was not a reassuring expression. "I'm saying your fail-safe just failed. The power core detonated at exactly 1437 hours, Galactic Standard Time." Later, when Thekvar was writing his incident report with hands that still shook, he would note that the explosion registered as a 7.2 magnitude seismic event on the facility's geological sensors. What he wouldn't mention in any official report was that Maya Chen had been counting down from 60 seconds with the precision of a chronometer. 58, 57, 56, she murmured, watching Crix and Moldan scramble to unlock her restraints as the evacuation alarm screamed overhead. "You might want to move a little faster there, boys. When that containment field collapses, the shock wave is going to travel through the facility's support structure at approximately." The world ended in fire and thunder. Section 7's eastern wall simply ceased to exist, replaced by a ball of superheated plasma that expanded outward with the casual indifference of a natural disaster. The blast wave hit the interrogation chamber 3 seconds later, turning reinforced walls into projectiles and sophisticated alien technology into very expensive shrapnel. Crix, who had been fumbling with the chair's locking mechanism, caught the full force of a support beam across his torso. The sound he made as it crushed his chest was mercifully brief. Mole Dan, his purple tentacles still wrapped around his communication device, and vanished entirely when the chamber's ceiling collapsed in a cascade of twisted metal and sparking electronics. Maya somehow was still sitting calmly in her chair. Not because the chair had protected her, mind you. The restraint system had been obliterated along with everything else in the room. She was sitting there because she had chosen to stay sitting, hands folded in her lap, while destruction raged around her like she was in the eye of a hurricane. Emergency Protocol 7 is now in effect. The facility's automated systems announced with the kind of calm that only artificial intelligence could maintain while everything was exploding. All personnel proceed to designated evacuation zones. Do not use elevators. Do not attempt to retrieve personal belongings. Do not. Do not. The announcement cut off as another explosion, smaller but more focused, took out the communication array. Maya stood up, brushed dust off her prison uniform, and stepped carefully over what remained of Sergeant Crick's. "Well," she said to nobody in particular, "that could have gone better." Through the gaping hole where the eastern wall used to be, she could see the facility's main evacuation routes. They were, predictably, completely blocked by debris and secondary fires. Aliens were running in every direction, except the ones that would actually lead to safety. Their advanced training apparently not covering the scenario where their impenetrable prison had suddenly developed several impenetrable holes. "No, no," she called out to a group of guards who were heading toward what used to be Corridor C. "That section's compromised. The structural supports are gone, and there's a plasma fire burning through the atmospheric recycling system. You go that way, you're going to get cooked." A Korvaxian guard, his gray skin streaked with soot, spun around to stare at her. "How do you know that?" Maya pointed to the pattern of smoke and the particular way the facility's lights were flickering. "Because I've been studying this place's blueprints for 47 days. When you're sitting in a cell with nothing to do, you notice things. Like how the emergency lighting system draws power from backup generators in Section 3, and how the atmospheric processors are connected to the main power grid through redundant pathways that run right through the areas that just got turned into modern art." She gestured toward the western corridor, where emergency lighting was still functioning and the air wasn't filled with toxic smoke. That way. The blast shielding in Section 4 should have held, and there's an emergency airlock that connects to the surface access tunnels. "Why should we trust a terrorist?" Another guard shouted, his weapon trained on Maya despite the fact that his hands were shaking too badly to aim properly. Maya looked at him with the kind of patience usually reserved for small children who had asked why the sky was blue. "Because, officer, whatever your name is, I'm the only person in this facility who actually knows how to get out of here alive. Your emergency protocols were designed by people who never considered that someone might blow up your power core from the inside. My suggestions are being made by someone who grew up on a planet where emergency evacuation was just another Tuesday." Another explosion rocked the facility, this one close enough to make the floor shake beneath their feet. Through the hole in the wall, they could see more sections of the prison collapsing in sequence, like dominoes made of reinforced steel and alien technology. "Tick-tock," Maya said cheerfully. "The secondary containment systems are going to fail in about 8 minutes. After that, this whole place is going to be a very large, very hot crater. Your choice, really." The guards looked at each other, looked at their destroyed facility, looked at the calm humans standing in the middle of the devastation, and made the only rational decision available. They followed the terrorist. What happened next would be studied in galactic military academies for decades to come, though they would diplomatically refer to it as unconventional crisis management techniques rather than how one human female turned a maximum security prison break into a masterclass in survival leadership. Maya took point without asking permission, which was probably wise since asking permission would have required finding someone in authority who wasn't either dead, unconscious, or running in circles screaming about containment failures. She moved through the wreckage with the fluid confidence of someone who had clearly given considerable thought to emergency evacuation procedures. "You, big guy," she called to a towering Velthari guard whose 4 arms were flailing uselessly at a collapsed doorway. Stop trying to dig through 3 tons of reinforced concrete with your bare hands. There's a maintenance shaft behind that panel that connects to the same corridor. The guard stared at her. How do you possibly know that? Because I've been watching maintenance crews for 6 weeks, Maya replied, already prying open the panel with a piece of twisted metal she'd picked up from the floor. You people rely so heavily on your fancy computer systems that you've forgotten basic spatial reasoning. This facility has backup routes for everything. You just need to think like someone who designed it to not kill everyone inside when something went wrong. Deathworlder, who had been monitoring the evacuation from his command center until the command center had become an unplanned skylight, stumbled through the debris to find his prisoners and guards working together under the direction of someone who should, by all rights, have been trying to escape rather than organize a rescue operation. Chen, he gasped, his ceremonial chest plates cracked and smoking. What are you doing? Maya glanced up from where she was showing a group of technicians how to manually override a sealed blast door using leverage and what appeared to be physics. Keeping people alive, Commander. I know it's not in my job description, but I'm improvising. This doesn't make sense, Deathworlder muttered, watching as Maya guided a injured Zephyrian through the maintenance shaft with the kind of careful patience one might use with a frightened animal. You're a terrorist. You should be trying to escape, not leading search and rescue operations. Maya paused in her work, fixing him with those unsettling brown eyes. Commander, I've been sitting in your prison for 47 days. Do you really think that if I wanted to escape, I would have waited for you to accidentally blow up your own facility? The implications of that statement hit Deathworlder like a second explosion. She could have left at any time. She had been staying by choice, which meant... Hey, you've been planning this, he whispered. Oh, absolutely not, Maya said, returning to her work with the blast door. I've been planning for this. Big difference. On Earth, we have a saying, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Your facility had 17 different catastrophic failure scenarios, and I'd worked out evacuation routes for all of them. This particular disaster is actually number 4 on my list. Right after alien invasion and quantum cascade failure, but before sentient artificial intelligence decides to redecorate with laser beams. She got the blast door open with a grinding screech of protesting metal. The good news is that most of my escape routes also work as rescue routes. The bad news is that we've got about 4 minutes before the tertiary power systems fail and the whole western section becomes structurally unsound. As if summoned by her words, another section of the facility collapsed with a rumble that shook dust from what remained of the ceiling. Emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging them into the eerie glow of plasma fires and sparking electronics. How do you know all this? Demanded Lieutenant Vexkill, her translator struggling to process her panicked chittering. Our own engineers don't understand the facility's emergency systems this well. Maya was already moving toward the next checkpoint, her voice floating back through the smoke-filled corridor. Your engineers designed this place assuming their technology would never fail. I analyzed it assuming everything would fail at the worst possible moment. Different perspectives, different preparations. She paused at a junction where 3 corridors met, sniffing the air like some kind of primitive tracking animal. Air currents wrong in the middle passage. Probably means there's a fire blocking the ventilation system. Left corridor has that ozone smell that means electrical systems are overloading. Right corridor it is. She's smelling her way through this, Deathworlder realized with growing horror. She's navigating by scent because our sensor network is down. Among other things, Maya called back cheerfully. I'm also listening to the sound patterns of structural stress, feeling for vibrations that indicate unstable flooring, and watching for the subtle color changes in emergency lighting that tell you which power grids are still functional. You know, basic survival stuff. The group of survivors, now numbering almost 30 between prisoners and guards, followed her through passages that their own facility schematics had listed as restricted access or maintenance only. Maya moved through them like she was following a map that existed only in her head, which, Deathworlder was beginning to realize, was exactly what she was doing. There, she said, pointing to what looked like a solid wall but which, upon closer inspection, had the faintest outline of a concealed door. Emergency exit 7. Connects directly to the surface transport hub. Should put us about half a kilometer from the blast zone, which ought to be safe enough. As she worked to open the concealed exit, using techniques that were definitely not in any Galactic Standard emergency manual, Thekvar found himself staring at the human with something approaching religious awe. "You're not a terrorist at all, are you?" he asked quietly. Maya looked back at him, and for just a moment her smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "Commander, I'm something much more dangerous than a terrorist. I'm a human who's been paying attention." The moment Maya Chen guided the last survivor through emergency exit 7, her entire demeanor changed. The helpful rescue coordinator vanished, replaced by something that made Thekvar's evolutionary instincts start screaming warnings his conscious mind couldn't quite process. "Well," she said, dusting off her hands with the satisfied air of someone who had just completed a particularly tedious chore, "that was educational. Thanks for the guided tour of your facility's structural weaknesses, Commander. I couldn't have planned a better reconnaissance mission if I'd tried." It took Thekvar's brain several precious seconds to catch up with what she'd just said. "Reconnaissance? You used the evacuation as reconnaissance?" Maya was already moving, not toward the surface transport hub where safety waited, but back toward the burning facility. 47 days of sitting in a cell gives you plenty of time to theorize about security layouts and emergency protocols. But there's nothing quite like a good disaster to show you how things actually work when the pretty diagrams meet messy reality. "Stop!" Thekvar shouted, but Maya had already vanished into the smoke and debris with the fluid grace of something that had never been a prisoner at all. "Security teams, converge on emergency exit 7. The human is escaping." What followed was less an escape attempt and more a masterclass in predatory behavior that would have made a Terran leopard proud. Maya didn't run from the security teams, she studied them. Every response, every tactical decision, every predictable movement pattern was catalogued and filed away for future use. The first team of guards found her footprints leading toward the collapsed Section 5, followed them for 20 minutes through twisted corridors and unstable debris, only to realize that the tracks doubled back on themselves in a pattern that was physically impossible unless someone had been walking backwards. While they stood there trying to figure out how she'd managed that particular trick, Maya dropped from a damaged ventilation shaft directly behind them. "Boo," she said pleasantly. 2 guards ended up unconscious. The third spent the next hour explaining to increasingly frustrated superiors that the human had somehow acquired his weapon, his communication equipment, and his dignity, all without making a sound. "She's toying with us," Lieutenant Vexkill reported over the emergency communication channel, her voice tight with the kind of panic that came from realizing you were no longer the hunter. "Every time we think we've cornered her, she's already 3 moves ahead. It's like she's reading our tactical responses before we make them." Thekvar, coordinating the search from what remained of his command center, was beginning to understand exactly why the Galactic Council's intelligence reports had been so concerned about humans. "She's not reading our responses, Lieutenant. She's predicting them. How long has she been studying us?" The answer, when it came, was worse than he'd feared. Maya's voice crackled over the communication channel she'd somehow hijacked from the unconscious guards. 47 days, Commander. 47 days of watching your guard rotations, learning your standard operating procedures, mapping your psychological response patterns. Did you know that Korvaxians always check corners in a counterclockwise pattern? Or that Zephyrians rely so heavily on their emotional sensing tentacles that they're practically blind to physical ambush tactics? Another security team went silent. Then another. "You people spend so much time being superior to primitive species that you never bothered to learn the most important lesson about evolution," Maya continued, her voice echoing through the facility's damaged communication system with the casual tone of someone giving a lecture. "Apex predators don't become apex predators by being the biggest or the strongest. They become apex predators by being the smartest, the most adaptable, and the most patient." Thekvar was beginning to sweat, a deeply unpleasant sensation for his species. "What do you want, Chen?" "What I've always wanted, Commander. To go home. The difference is that now I know everything I need to know about your security protocols, your facility layouts, your species behavioral patterns, and your emergency response procedures. 47 days of education that's going to be very useful for future reference." The realization hit him like a physical blow. You're not just escaping. You're gathering intelligence. Maya's laugh was soft and absolutely terrifying. "Commander, I stopped being your prisoner the moment I decided to start talking. Everything since then has just been field research." The lights went out across the facility, plunging everything into darkness. When they flickered back on 30 seconds later, Maya Chen was gone. But somehow, Thekvar had the feeling she was still watching them. Thekvar found Maya Chen exactly where he knew she would be, in his private command office, sitting in his chair, reading his classified files with the casual interest of someone browsing a particularly dull technical manual. "Commander," she said without looking up from his personal terminal. "Right on time. I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in your own facility." The office was a disaster zone. Blast damage had shattered the reinforced windows, emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and the smell of smoke and melted electronics hung in the air like a funeral shroud. But Maya looked perfectly comfortable, as if she were holding court in a palace instead of the ruins of a maximum security prison. "How did you get past the quantum locks?" Thekvar asked, his voice hoarse from breathing smoke and shouting orders that no one could follow. Maya gestured to the sparking remains of the door's security system. "Turns out your quantum locks have a design flaw. They're programmed to automatically disengage if the facility's main power grid drops below 12% capacity. A safety feature, presumably so important personnel don't get trapped during emergencies." She swiveled the chair to face him, and Thekvar was struck by how small she looked in the oversized alien furniture. Small but not helpless. Never helpless. The really interesting part is that the same safety protocol applies to your data archives, all those classified files about prison security, guard rotations, and facility blueprints for other installations across the sector. They're all available to anyone with basic computer skills once the power grid hits critical levels. You orchestrated this entire disaster just to access classified intelligence, Thekvar realized, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, Commander," Maya said, shaking her head with what might have been genuine disappointment. "You're still thinking too small. I didn't orchestrate anything. I just recognized an opportunity when I smelled it coming." She stood up, moving away from the desk with the fluid grace that had become so familiar and so terrifying over the past few hours. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to let me walk out of here. In exchange, I'm going to give you something far more valuable than one escaped prisoner." "And what's that?" Maya smiled, and it was the expression of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "I'm going to let you live long enough to warn your superiors about what they're really dealing with." She moved to the shattered window, looking out at the burning remains of the facility that had once been considered impregnable. "You see, Commander, your people have been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about humans. You think we're dangerous because we're violent, because we come from a death world, because we're unpredictable. Aren't you?" Thekvar asked. "We're dangerous because we're adaptable," Maya replied. "Because we learn. Because we take whatever situation we're thrown into and we figure out how to not just survive it, but how to turn it to our advantage. You put me in a cell for 47 days thinking you were containing a threat. What you were actually doing was giving me a graduate-level education in galactic security protocols." She turned back to face him, and in the red emergency lighting her eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Every human you capture, every Deathworlder you interrogate, every primitive species you underestimate is learning from you, studying you, figuring out how you think, how you fight, how you fail." Thekvar felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You're not just one escaped prisoner. You're a scout." "Now you're beginning to understand?" Maya said approvingly. The question is, what are you going to do with that understanding? She walked past him toward the ruined doorway, pausing only to pat his shoulder with the casual familiarity of an old friend. I'd recommend starting with a complete review of your species' first contact protocols, and maybe investing in some better atmospheric sensors. The Galactic Council will hunt you down, Thekvar called after her. You can't hide forever. Maya's laugh echoed through the damaged corridors as she disappeared into the maze of wreckage and smoke. Commander, I'm not hiding. I'm going home to file my report. 3 hours later, Thekvar sat in the ruins of his command center, staring at the emergency communication array and trying to figure out how to explain to his superiors that their maximum security prison had been turned into a smoking crater by a small human female who had been helping with the evacuation right up until the moment she decided to vanish with half their classified intelligence files. He began typing his report with trembling fingers. Priority Alpha message to Galactic Command. Subject: immediate reassessment of Terran threat classification required. The humans are not what we thought they were. They're worse. In the distance, a transport ship lifted off from the facility's landing pad, carrying its single passenger toward the edge of known space. Chen was going home, and she was taking 47 days' worth of very interesting information with her. The galaxy was about to become a much more complicated place. The legend of the quiet human who brought down the Vorthak Maximum Security Detention Center would spread through the galactic underground within days. Some versions claimed she had supernatural powers. Others insisted she was part of some vast Terran conspiracy. A few even suggested she was some kind of advanced artificial intelligence disguised as a primitive Deathworlder. They were all wrong, of course. Chen was something far more terrifying than any of those theories suggested. She was a human being who had been underestimated, given time to think, and then presented with an opportunity. And as every species in the galaxy would soon learn, that was the most dangerous combination in the known universe. The Deathworlder girl had finally spoken. 3 words had started it all. 2 guards had died in the explosion that followed. But it was what came after that would change everything. Chen was going home, and she had 47 days' worth of very interesting things to tell her people about their new galactic neighbors. The galaxy's first contact protocols were about to be tested by a species that had learned to survive by turning every disadvantage into an opportunity, every prison into a classroom, and every disaster into a chance to study their enemies. Humanity was coming, and they had been paying very, very close attention.